The world feels heavy right now. You feel it, I feel it. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, you know that we don't look away from broken things. We look into them. Because that's the whole idea behind kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The break isn't something to hide. It's where the beauty lives. So today's question isn't, is something broken? We know the answer to that. The question is, what can we do about it? My guest today is Neal Collins. He grew up in South Louisiana, watched Hurricane Katrina reshape everything he knew, found his way to a Peace Corps assignment in the Republic of Moldova, and has since worked everywhere from the Maldives to the Pacific Northwest. He now lives on a 5-acre biodynamic homestead on Whidbey Island and is doing something that I think is genuinely radical. He's reimagining what real estate can be, not just as a financial instrument, but as a vehicle for healing land, building community, and creating something worth passing down. It's called regenerative real estate. And when I first heard that phrase, I didn't know what it meant either, but I knew I wanted to. And after talking with Neal, I think you will too. This is Coated in Gold. Before we get into the work itself, take me back to the beginning. How did you get to where you are? And by the way, today we are going to be talking about regenerative real estate. And I know when I first heard it, I was like, I don't know what that is. I like what it sounds like. So how did you arrive in your current state? Where are you from? I know your background. You've lived all over the world. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, as I'm calling in now, my body and soul and family live on Whidbey Island in Washington State, just north of Seattle, on a small 5-acre biodynamic. I guess you could call it a homestead. It's really just our loving scratch patch that we like to really put stewardship into practice here. But these are really distant lands. I'm still kind of calibrating to the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in South Louisiana in a very different cultural context.
Right.
And really the path forward whenever you grew up there, at least as I saw it, was I was probably going to have a career influenced or directly in the oil and gas industry. And that didn't seem too promising for me, especially I was in college at the time in Louisiana, and my sophomore year, Hurricane Katrina hit, devastated everything, completely disrupted the entire state, and certainly implanted it in my mind. And I think by senior year, another storm came in and flooded out that town of Baton Rouge that I was living in as well. And these were 10,000-year storm events. The likelihood of that happening was pretty low until you start to realize these are pretty commonplace events that we're going to have to be living through now. And I was trying to find a way out. How do I see the world? How do I figure out who I am through this process of getting raised in a place that I don't really want to continue to call home anymore? And I found myself on the cheapest, quickest plane ticket out of there, which was through the Peace Corps, and landed in Eastern Europe, working with farmers and very agrarian producers in the Republic of Moldova, having never heard of this country before. It was not in any of my geography books, at least. And through that process of learning to just sit in the uncomfortableness of community and having to build relationships and realize that as a 22-year-old young male without any skills in the professional world, I had nothing to give but my time and my willingness to build friendships and really the ability to be an ambassador of peace and friendship during a time that I was trying to figure out how to orient and help in that role. And it got to a point where I realized my job wasn't to write grants. It wasn't to teach English and all that. My job actually was to say, what do you want to create here? And how do I be supportive along the way? And I tell you, David, I love that orientation to community development by not saying, what are your needs? because if you go into any community across the world, if you ask them what their needs are, one, if you're coming from a Western context, it is perpetuated a system of broken promises and a power dynamic that I don't really want to perpetuate. But if you ask a different question, what do you want to create here? You tap into a generative spirit that empowers the stakeholders and the community members, and it enables them to really sit into that to say, yeah, if we're going to create something that we want, not only does it have to check the boxes of what we actually need, but it gets into another framework that I think unlocks more potential that is embedded within the collective society of a neighborhood or a larger community or within a group of organizations that are trying to work together. So that was my work. I fell in love with it. I ended up working for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. We ended up in the Maldives and India, doing climate change adaptation projects and marine protected areas. And it was a blast. I loved it. But what was so imprinting upon me was that the people that were funding climate change adaptation, marine protection, and species conservation work were the real estate developers and operators. We are talking the Six Senses, the Hiltons, the Conrads. You know, it was luxury 5-star operators that had the budget to enable conservation. And that was where the light bulb really went off in my mind after trying to raise money from all these philanthropic organizations that, yeah, you can certainly raise money that way. But by the time you end up actually trying, you've successfully funded, you started with an idea that started in one place, but to meet the criteria of the donors, you ended up doing something completely different. And you really had to squint to see the original vision there. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we actually had more control of our financial destiny here? And maybe that is embedded within the real estate industry. And the more that I got into it, the more I realized that real estate was the common ground that brought so many different sectors together, from the public sector to the private, from how we live to actually how the economy is oriented, because real estate is just a sleeve for finance. And it impacts everything else. So, you know, it kind of fit my box with poverty alleviation, that we were doing in India, and realizing that's a real estate question as well, or a real estate problem. And so I came back to the United States, really jumped into the belly of the beast and wanted to learn, how do you do real estate at scale? Pursued another master's degree in commercial real estate development, and was really fortunate to work on some pretty transformative projects, urban revitalization districts, where it was $2 to $3 billion worth of commercial development. And I really got to understand this is how these projects work. And unfortunately, by the time that I really got to the point where I was starting to feel comfortable within my own skin in the industry, and we were doing more of our own investment and in placemaking activities, we had a lot of our family come down with debilitating and terminal diagnoses. So this is cancer and ALS. And through that process of trying to figure out how do you continue to run these companies and be a professional while also dealing with sick family members across the country with a 1-year-old baby, I had to actually just put real estate on pause and really re-examine that. And I learned through this process of caretaking, or just trying to show up and not freak out myself with that existential threat of people that you love are dying. I found it's not just the quality of the medicine that we are taking that is a healing journey right now. A healing journey starts with the food that we're putting in our body, the relationships that we're surrounding ourselves with, the community support structures that we have, because then it doesn't matter if you're choosing Western or Eastern medicine, you actually can have some semblance of well-being despite the hardships that you're having to go through. And I realized these are not the things that we're talking about in my profession that I've come to really love and I see as a huge catalyst within the real estate industry. But we're not talking about creating agency for community. We're not talking about creating healthy homes. We're not talking about preserving farmland so that we can eat healthy food. And that was my inquiry to say, how do I make sense of this industry where my values around sustainability are showing up in heat pumps, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, all things that I think are amazing and that we need, but it isn't, it's parallel. It's not completely overlapping. And the only words that I could really find was regeneration.
Mm.
And in 2020, it started a deep inquiry into what would be a regenerative approach towards real estate. And that is really where I don't even like to offer a definition of what regenerative real estate is. And that is largely because I think it's been somewhat co-opted. It's great to be the first person to put a term out there, but if you try to hold it loose, some of the things that have come about is a little bit more kind of off-grid glamping, eco-village
Ah,
vibes. And
sure,
I
sure.
am over here. We're trying to steward lots of capital and actually make real places that people can every day can live in. And it's not an escape from society. It is changing society to be more whole. And so that is really where I'm sitting now 6 years later in 2026 saying it is a path of regeneration that we go down. It is not the final product. It is the process through which we do development. We incorporate community to do placemaking in the way that we are making investment decisions that leads to, I think, regenerative outcomes.
Wow. You just summed up in one concept an approach that is taking on many of the fissures that we see cracking in society today. And I guess you're kind of blowing my mind. Like, I hadn't thought about them all being compacted into real estate, but I completely see it. And I also think like your work's cut out for you. This is hard work. Like,
Yeah, who said it? It was like if you can accomplish the vision that you have within one lifetime, you're not thinking big enough. I think to a
mm,
fault. I really gravitate towards complex problems, but they don't feel like problems. It really feels like we're living in a time that unequivocally I can say the world that we have is the world that we've invested in. And and
oh,
yesterday I had to drive into the city in Seattle and I'm going through North Seattle and I'm passing by all types of self-storage uh, projects and fast food restaurants. And it's just really stark. Like that is the world where capital flowed
that's right.
to generate a return. And the quality of the decision making was based purely upon, hey, there's a private equity roll up that's going to do these self storage containers,
That's right.
and next thing you know, that's making a permanent mark on the community. And so for me, within the real estate space, I think that you can take a regenerative approach to any type of development activity or stewardship activity. Um, but I wanted to start to really create the stage of what do I want to get good at? How do we bring these pieces together that really plays upon home and placemaking and commerce and community and cultivation and put it all on one board and say, okay,
Sure.
this is the corner of the industry that I really want to play in. And to do that, it has required to get really comfortable with capital to say we
Oh,
need to
yeah.
invest for better outcomes.
That's right. Share with us your grand vision, the way you believe that we should be living. Um, what does that actually look like?
You know, I don't want to be so dogmatic to say this is how we all should be living, but I
Sure.
do think that we've learned a couple of golden rules along the way,
Okay.
and they're pretty simple, profoundly challenging sometimes to put into practice. But I think largely we can all recognize that the way that we've treated real estate and placemaking and city building and all that is separating human habitat from natural habitat.
Mm.
Nature's over there, humans over here. We get our food from over there. It's out of sight, out of mind. It's got a very complex supply chain to get it from there into where we live over here. And what has happened is I think we've really degraded the quality of our own habitat as part of that process. And it's why we're starting to see record amounts of disease, autoimmune issues, cancers, um, across the board.
Sure.
And so what we're basically trying to do, the grand vision is, how do we bring these back together? How do we create more biophilic places? Somebody put it
What
really
does
well.
that mean? What does that mean?
Biophilia is a term that was coined by entomologist E.O. Wilson that
Okay.
basically means a love of life. And so how do we
Ah,
design spaces that are going to be conducive for our health and well-being, realizing that we co-evolved with nature, right? If you separate us out, this is the thing that I was talking to my 9-year-old about. He's like, what would it be like to live on Mars? And I'm like, I don't even know, because how do you take a human species that grew up on Earth that's codependent upon the
that's right.
plurality of life and bring it to a place that is so devoid of that? How could we actually live there? I don't know for how long. And I think we need to do that. We still have that work to do here to say, how do we create these spaces that are going to be conducive for community and well-being? And so that is really the grand vision, is to create really meaningful communities across the United States, across the world. I'm not really sure what our sandbox is right now. We have an incredible opportunity with incredible partners internationally to do this. And what I love about that, while trying to figure out how do we grow a firm to handle that type of inbound interest in our approach, is to say this isn't just something that is specific to the Pacific Northwest, because they
Right. Oh,
that
sure.
sure, like they get it over there, they're going to be doing that
Sure.
naturally. But this
Yep.
conversation is happening in New York, it's happening in Texas, it's happening in the Philippines and in India
Right.
and Sao Paulo. Like I know that it is a human condition that we're all striving to live in places that are going to be whole. And so that is the kind of operator and placemaker within me, to learn, how do we switch into supporting that endeavor through the capital markets.
I was going to ask you, how do we get from where we are today to there? And I think you're you're saying it. Capital markets are going to help us get there.
Capital markets is the way in which we've had to naturally figure out how to get there, right? A project in the real estate realm, it is capital intensive. It's capital intensive on the financial side, on the human side, on the resources side. So for me, I see our work as a bridge. I'm not saying, look, we're going to go out and decommoditize all land and we're going to live in perfect harmony until the end of days.
Right.
I don't know how to get there, but I do know how to work with the project on a process that is going to honor land and work with that place to bring in community, to bring in stakeholders, to create something that is going to be more alive, so that we can start to really check off some of these boxes around what we do think makes a whole community, around income diversity, age diversity, home product diversity, um, ways in which we can support the cultivation of crops and enable conservation of really critical habitats like wetlands and forest and streams and riparian areas. And so I do that through the aperture of going out and investing in agriculturally integrated and conservation communities. So agrihoods, farm to table hospitality, conservation neighborhoods. That is the end product that we kind of showcase. But the difference that I think a lot of the real estate industry has taken is you can stamp out a neighborhood or a community that looks exactly the same from Tempe, Arizona to Orlando, Florida. And
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a 2-car garage, a front door, a lollipop tree, and then next to it is a 2-car garage, a front door, and a lollipop tree.
Right.
And I don't think that kind of homogeneity is the type of communities that people get really excited about. And I think there's just this larger trend of one, we're seeing farmland getting gobbled up incredibly fast by suburbanization, and we have the opportunity to take an approach that preserves typically 70 or more percent of land to keep as agriculture and conservation and open space while creating more meaningful mixed income, mixed multi-generational villages that are more clustered together on those sites. So that's how we do it, and we still need capital to enable site acquisition, entitlement, putting in infrastructure, and the horizontal development that's needed, as well as creating the homes that are going to be there. And so this is where the world of impact and the world of pure opportunistic capitalism has to meet, in that we've worked with a lot of people that are trying to figure out how do they invest in regenerative agriculture, which is basically, in my simple definition, how do we lower our inputs for more outputs in a much more ecological way? And whenever capital is trying to do that, it's finding a really hard entry point. But with real estate, by trying to blend these two concepts together, we know that we can create value whenever we take a degraded property or an agricultural property that we might be buying for $10,000 an acre, and going through the entitlement process that allows us to put a community and a farm there. So now the value has substantially increased. We get an entitlement uplift, and that it creates value for investors. We know that if you put in horizontal infrastructure, it creates value for the land. And whenever you build buildings, you are creating value every single step of that way. And so what we have to do is we have to define where do we want to play? Like, can we make the most outsized influence on a place, protect our investment, and ensure that we're not trying to get a 20% IRR out of a farmer that's growing in a regenerative way, but we can depressurize that side while generating real value where it's much more conducive to doing that. So that's our whole thesis, kind of boiled down in a really simple, presentable, and approachable way.
I live in Portland, Oregon, and suburbanization, we live in the burbs, and it's incredibly lonely, right? We go from our bubble at home to our bubble at school, our bubble at the gym. It lacks meaning. But what you're really doing is you're putting in the hard work to figure out what the future state of home is. There's also this tension right now in America where our urban centers aren't thriving. Well, we have kids, so we can't help but imagine future states of being, right?
Yeah, we've got skin in the game here. I was reading in Realtor.com the other day about a project that we have some affiliation with called Rooted Northwest. It's outside of Seattle in Arlington. A group of people, incredibly passionate, had the same question: how do we raise our kids? What would the ideal thing to do? Like, we're paying so much money living in these inner neighborhoods in Seattle. How do we actually create something that we'd love to raise our families in? And they ended up buying a 240-acre former dairy property. And they said co-housing is really the idea that we latch on to, is like, how do we come together and have shared spaces around, if we wanted to do an event or share a meal or have a game room for kids and a craft room for,
right,
this event. And how do we then use this extra land, because they're only building really 70 homes, the rest of the acreage is going towards a collective of small scale farmers that are growing everything from flowers to raising chickens and eggs to doing silvopasture. And so they're creating this agri-village, and realtor.com picked up this story. And I would say, half the comments are just like, oh my God, this is a dream. I want to live there. But then there is enough people in our society today that says this must be a cult, that we have somehow.
I'm so glad you just said that, because like as you started, the story, I'm like, my cult alarm is going off. So, okay, go ahead. Yes.
Right. And I think this is the point, is that like we have in our cultural imagination, we have come so far from trying to think that it is, or to thinking that it is normal to create homes around gardens and agriculture and community, that we label it as like, it's just got to be a cult.
Wow.
Because why else would somebody do this? Why would you go through that expense whenever, developers, they just build really kind of crappy subdivisions. Like that's what we expect of the industry.
Absolutely.
And I'm over here saying this is wild. Like, a lot of our projects are going to be labeled cults, and I'm going to have to get okay with that. But is that really where we're at right now? And the really interesting thing is that once you go to these places and you say, wow, this is an amazing place to actually raise a family, or to age in place with community, where you have safety and security from knowing your neighbors, but you have the ability to have your own privacy and your own space. Like, this is something that I think that we all want. And you start to track, like, how do we create more resilient places, more sustainable places? Well, that means we don't need to be getting in our cars all the time. So how do we start to design for walkability and bikeability? And if you've gone down the rabbit hole of blue zones, which is amazing, of like, what are these longevity hotspots? It's a real estate thing. It's a design problem of how do we design for human thriving, and human thriving happens to be ecological thriving and resilience as well. And so that it doesn't have to get more complicated than that. If that's a cult, then sign me up.
It feels like we say community a lot, but the more I hear community, the less I see of it. Like if there's an organization that keeps talking about community, chances are the less community cohesion there really is. Meanwhile, I mean, my own personal experience, I was born and raised in the, in the LDS church, they never talked about community. It was assumed and baked in, right? And we went to church. That was and they called it a meeting house. But it was a place where families went, where we were at church multiple times a week, and that was community, but no one ever talked about it as community. And that was a really great example of that time where, religious institutions were these organizing forces for community. Yeah. And I think now we are in a place where we have to think about it again in a more secular way, because yeah.
Are you familiar with the urban philosopher? I believe his name is Ray Oldenburg, out of Florida.
No.
What he did is he described a term called third places. Your first place is your home, your second place is your work or your school, and the third place is actually where life can happen in between, our gathering spots. And as religious institutions have faded within our society, what's picked up the slack has been retail. Our malls and our developers and all these places have like, hey, let's try to figure out how to create these places that people want to be naturally, and it's going to be pretty cool because they're going to spend a lot of money there. That I think is this really fascinating concept of, the church was a third place. It was where people could come together. Like I grew up in Sunday school as well, and it was a place in which like you knew the people that were going to be there and that you could count on to some degree. And there's an 89-year-old biodynamic farmer up on Lopez Island who has a really interesting take on community. He said, people these days, they choose their communities by interest. If you're into chess, there's a chess club. If you're into this, you go to that. And it's this very like amorphous sense of community. He's like, but
Right.
real community to me is whenever you have to live in proximity to people that you actually might not like, that you rely upon. There's a
Oh, I'm
mutualism
so glad you're talking about this.
of neighbors and community to create layers of support. And I really feel that here. Like, I moved to this island in the Puget Sound. I didn't know very many people. We're a little bit on the younger side, going in our fourth generation on this planet. So it's like, where are we? But what they've really shown me is like, what does it mean to be a community? How do you actually show up for this place and for other people without it just being a special interest group?
Right.
And so, you know, for the folks that actually want to create a community that has religion embedded within it, sure, I think that could be an interesting flavor of development. And we're sometimes you have an audience that they really want to talk about the spirituality aspect of designing for nature, and other times we have an audience of people that, in order for them to understand what we do, if we switch a golf course out with a farm, and you don't have to think too much harder than that.
Right.
That's just fine, you know. So it's creating first places, second places, and third places. Basically, is where I was going with that.
I want to dig in here a little bit and go deeper on this idea of community, meaning you are in close proximity and in community with people who you may not like.
But I think it's so interesting whenever you look at how a lot of people live. They'll come home from the store, from work, they'll open up their garage, they pull in, they shut their garage, and you never have to talk to anybody else, except you can get on Facebook, you can get on Instagram, you can read political posts, and you can just roast people in the comments. And that is what it means to be participating in civil and civic dialogue these days. And I think it's a very different lived experience. If you have the opportunity to get to your front door, you're going to have a spontaneous run-in with one or two of your neighbors, and you're going to be forced to have a conversation. It could be brief, it could be, hi, how's your day? Or you could just drop in like, oh my goodness, you know, this is what's going on for me right now, or what's going on for them. And you have a great conversation. Or it could be like you're trying to make dinner. I remember living in Portland. We lived in North Portland in a close-in neighborhood, and we had, you know, our 3 or 4-year-old at that time out front. And I could see out the kitchen window, the front door was open. He was playing in the front yard. And somebody actually came up and they said, you know, your son is playing outside on the sidewalk? I said, yeah, I do know that. And I got the third degree. Just, how
Wait
can
a
you
minute.
do this?
You
You're
got
being
the third degree
irresponsible.
in Portland?
In Portland, yeah. Just like, this
Whoa.
is totally irresponsible. You should be out there with him. And it's like, you know, how far do we have to be removed from community to say, wouldn't it be nice to actually live in a place where we know our neighbors, they know who we are, they have an eye on the children that are playing, or maybe it's the seniors that you need to go check on, or they need you to go check on them. It doesn't matter what age group you are. And I think that's how you start to see how we've created community over time, is like the folks that are our age, we're helping the folks that are above us and below us in age ranges, but they're helping us as well. The elders are able to keep a watchful eye on the youngsters. You're able to get mentorship and relief. Like this is a design problem. This is not necessarily, look, you have your parcel over there, we put a 12-foot fence in front of it, you drive into your garage, and that's it. I think it's a really bad land planning. It eats up a lot of land. It really prioritizes cars and concrete more than it creates connection. And so I am not saying this is how everybody should live. I love living in the city. I think there's a lot of offerings with the city, but at the same time, I think that we do deserve to create really different kind of places that people are drawn towards and they're really thirsty for right now in our society. And because food, we haven't even talked about food. Food is one of these like love languages coming from South Louisiana. So I think building community is like actually having people at my dinner table and cooking with love, slowly, with locally made ingredients is just like, it's the best. Right. And so I want, like, my ideal kind of work situation is how do we create more of those moments for ourselves and for other people. And so that's why the agricultural component and the culinary component is so important for us. And we're really excited. Now we're working with a new advisor from Stone Barns. And I think we had talked about this
Yes,
of just in upstate New York of like this incredible approach towards land stewardship that is expressed through the essence of a carrot or a pea or a piece of meat that comes from that local bioregion or that watershed. I just think that's incredible. And that's why I love this layered cake of, we can talk about societal, we can talk about land planning, we can geek out on great architecture or horrible architecture. We, and we could talk about food and agriculture. And it's like, let's just make one big, amazing layered cake out of this. And that's what I've really oriented my profession towards.
Wow. Okay, I want to skip up to what you're doing at Hamlet Capital.
It is one of these amazing opportunities where I had been getting called into very purpose-aligned projects in this realm, primarily as either our company Latitude. We've been putting out this beat of regenerative real estate for a long time, but we're really this kind of brokerage platform of whenever a property needs to transfer ownership, a lot of the times the sellers of these really unique and extraordinary properties, they're having a hard time finding the right next buyer. And that was essentially what Latitude has become. We work a lot with farms, homesteads, really healthy homes, just kind of a different approach to real estate brokerage. But I kept getting called into these projects where it might be a farmer or a developer or a community group saying, how do we put these projects together? How do we create an agri-hood or preserve this land and not have it go to like 90% of it becomes these homogenous housing? And so I was first called in kind of on the marketing side, and then as an owner's rep side or a consultant, and then it evolved into a principal. And invariably in every single project, it was, well, where does the capital come from? Like, they might have the land, but they don't have the money to actually put the project together after that. And this is what my profession is how do we not only do the planning and the entitlement work, but how does the capital flows come to support these outcomes that we spent so much time and intention trying to put together? And in that gap of where there's not really capital flowing is what Hamlet Capital was created for, was to say, we want to go out and invest in agri-hoods and conservation communities and farm hospitality projects. And we think that there is no other capital allocator out there in the market that we can find that we've been able to use. So sure. We understand actually what the return profile looks like of this. We've done it. We've done blended finance. We brought in philanthropic partners for the agriculture, for affordable housing, for all these different pieces. So we've got a lot of expertise in this space. And now let's actually create the right type of capital structure that can breathe life into more of these communities. And so I have fantastic partners in this, David Leon and Matt Siegel. We have a host of amazing advisors that are seeped in the capital markets, in agriculture, and regenerative agriculture, and placemaking and design. And these are the folks that are reading the tea leaves the same way that we are. And we're finding that there is an incredible pipeline of demand of landowners and developers across the world that are looking to create these types of places. And so
Mm.
we don't consider ourselves an impact firm, but we do really see where we invest being catalytic capital that unlocks, once you get through these entitlements, all of a sudden it unlocks a lot of different types of capital that can come in that is much more conventional, from bank financing and debt to more equity to builders and other developers coming on board. And so we're really focused on creating, in the financial world, we're creating alpha in healthy returns that are not concessionary. We are not trying to be an impact firm where we're saying we're giving up the market rate of return because the impact is just so good. We really are trying to put them together side by side, to say we invest where we can create the most outsized value that then unlocks much more de-risk capital to come in after that.
I can imagine there's got to be a lot of critics out there. They're like, "Hey, that's just not an efficient use of capital." Like, how do you respond to the naysayers?
I don't know if I necessarily see the naysayers outside, like within the capital world. If we're competitive in the landscape of investment returns,
Yep.
it doesn't matter.
Well,
Like,
no, it doesn't matter. Yeah, yeah.
bring the naysayers of that. Look, we have a market demand for people that want to live this way. We have a market demand for people that are looking to invest in ways in which delivers a healthy return to them in a risk-adjusted manner that also supports the kind of world that they want to live in. And then there is a skill and expertise gap that we are trying to fill in the middle of that. And so basically, if you look at what other master plan communities are doing, that, let's say it's a large master plan community that is centered around a golf course, they're going through the same mechanics. They've got to
Sure.
acquire land, they've got to
Absolutely.
entitle it, so they're taking risk there. Maybe they're buying it for the same amount, $10,000 an acre, and they know that as you go through each one of these phases, from acquisition to entitlement to horizontal to vertical, what you're doing is you're creating more value all along the way, and you're tranching out the risk of each one of those phases. What I'm really excited about is the proof is going to be in the pudding when actually you can set foot and buy a house in these projects. The surprising thing that I found is that the investors that we have, one of the common threads that we get from everybody is, God, this sounds so cool. Yeah, I'm down to invest, but can I also buy a house? And okay, that's a really interesting signal that we should really heed.
That's right.
So that's what Hamlet Capital is doing right now. And the kind of secret sauce that we found is that it's really hard to write a passive check into this space. There's not the proliferation of developers out there with this kind of development experience that you can just say, absolutely, here's a $5 million check, have at it. We'll check in whenever you're done. With Hamlet, we are incorporated in 2025, and we got into we've got into a couple of projects that I'm really excited about, but they're still in the entitlement phase. And there are projects out there that I get a lot of inspiration from, and it's invariably where a lot of people go. There's an amazing community outside of Atlanta, Georgia, called Serenbe that was developed by a restaurateur named Steve Nygren. They were able to go out and essentially do collective bargaining with 60,000 acres with a bunch of different landowners to create a conservation development district that says if you conserve 70% of the land, then this is the type of density that is allowed here. And it's created a really thriving community. So we have these predecessors that have come before us that we're fortunate. A senior advisor of ours has been very intimately involved in most of these projects across the country. And these can include places like kind of smaller footprint communities like Fox Point Farms and Encinitas, which is on 22 acres. They've got a really lively commercial scene integrated into the farm with 3-story walk-up condominiums.
I've been to Fox Point Farms.
Oh, you have? Great. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely. And it was actually really wonderful that you said it. And like now I'm like, oh, I've been there. I think I know exactly what you're talking about.
You know, we're starting to see more and more across the board, and people on the back end. I think COVID was a really wild time too, that enabled folks to say, yeah, we don't have to live in LA. We could go move um, wherever we want at this point in time. So we see
Totally.
that on the data, and there's certainly an undersupply of these types of places, and have built a lot of conviction in the space, enough to us to significantly invest in it and really alter the course of our careers because of it.
On a previous episode recently, we had a Portland-based housing advocate, and that conversation's been sitting with me. And I'm curious how you see the housing crisis, the affordable housing crisis, from where you sit.
Yeah, I think affordable housing is one of these issues that you can't necessarily stick your head in the sand anymore to be in the arena and just say, we're going to let somebody else do that. I wish, because it can be
Sure.
brain trauma inducing, because it can be quite complex because of the way that the system is really set up.
Right.
I sometimes can get lost in this world, to be honest. I'm reading a book right now called Abundance by Ezra Klein, and they're making this case that, like, we're chronically undersupplied of housing in these affluent areas. We've actually created the community mechanisms to stop the housing that we need by affluent neighbors being like that. We don't want that kind of development in our backyard.
That's right.
So, right, NIMBYism. But at the same time, I don't know if I'm on the other side of the spectrum, where it's just like, we need more supply, and that's going to bring the housing prices down. There's some examples that we've seen, like in Austin, Texas recently. Their home prices have dropped 30% because they were oversupplied, and they built their way out of a problem. I don't know if that holds up across the board, of just, we're going to build more, and we're just going to conserve everything, and we're going to hope that the government or the market can give enough low-income housing tax credits. What I do think, though, is if you're going to work, particularly in coastal regions on the west or the east coast, you're going to work in a manner in which you want citizenry and neighbors and politicians to be excited about the project. You are going to be asked, or not even asked, you are going to be told that if you want to do work here, you're going to have to deliver affordable housing. And that's where you have to put on your thinking hat to say, okay, what creates affordable housing? And there's a range. Like, if we're talking under 80% of area median income, and you're working with the folks that, maybe it's a teacher or a librarian, they're making $60,000 a year, and naturally affordable to them would be a $200,000 to $300,000 home, but you're in a community that average home prices start in $600,000. You have a real gap, so it's a problem. So that's where we really try to bring in more developers and politicians and financial tools that enable these outcomes, to say, can we target affordability through something like a land trust, through developers that their whole model is using these types of tax credits to enable this? Are there ways in which we can create public-private partnerships with the municipalities so that we can create tax incremental financing districts, so that we're not having to put so much money into the infrastructure, that we can actually take some of this capital to put it into affordable and attainable housing? And then the last thing, and I'm in my mind, I'm moving on this gradient, is like, how do we start to create more places that are going to be diverse, that aren't so cookie cutter? Because and this is what I love, is like, now there's actually science saying people that live in smaller houses are actually happier and healthier. Maybe not the healthier part, but they're certainly happier.
Absolutely.
If our definition of success is no longer the 3,000 square foot McMansion, but it's the 1,500 square foot house that we can have 3 bedrooms in, and your neighbor might live in a 900 square foot place, and you've got your mother-in-law in the back, and she's in a 500 square foot mother-in-law ADU,
Right.
and you can have these different housing types, and maybe you've got a duplex down the road and a triplex,
That's right.
and you've got the diversity of sizes and home products. Then all of a sudden you start to create pockets of attainability, because
Cool.
I want the range of incomes. I want the range of ages. I
Sure.
want the
Same.
range of people that are working in different professions, or in
That's,
retirees and all that. So
that's
I
right.
get excited about that. We spend a lot of time working on that. It's not something that I like to shy away from, but I do say it definitely requires a lot of complex situation thinking, and bringing really competent and skilled partners to the table with us.
What's giving you hope right now? And what are you most optimistic about?
You know what gives me hope is just the amount of people that are showing up at our
Mm,
door and saying, I'm in. Like, what do I need to do? It's almost so overwhelming that for the first time in my life, I'm like, wow, my calendar is unmanageable to the amount of people that would like to have a conversation about this, of how to create this.
wow.
How do I get involved? How do I move here? And so I'm at this phase of like, wow, I need to figure out how to guard my time a little bit more.
Sure.
But that is a really good problem to have, to say, like, it seems like we're on to something here.
It certainly
And
is. It's a great problem to have.
yeah, and this is where I'm encouraged by the type of people that are having a stewardship mindset, to say, instead of ownership, I'm really sitting with this question of stewardship, and what does that look like? And I'm really encouraged by the transfer of wealth to people that are thinking about legacy, and they're making decisions really interesting, from either they're a second generation where they're inheriting significant means, or they are of a generation that might have generated significant wealth, and they really want to create legacy moving forward. And so, our business model is, how do we find great projects, and how do we find great investors that are values aligned, that want to encourage the type of work that we're doing. And they're both showing up, and it's filled with incredible people that are so interesting and passionate and supportive. So that gives me a lot of hope on a day-to-day basis right now.
Neal, thank you for coming on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it.
What Neal said at the end of our conversation has stayed with me. He said people are showing up at his door and saying, I'm in. What do I need to do? And honestly, that's the kind of answer to the question we started with today. The world is heavy. Things feel broken. But people are showing up. Communities are forming. And that right there is gold in the cracks. If Neal's work resonates with you, find him on LinkedIn, check out Hamlet.Capital, or dig into his podcast, the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. Links are in the show notes. And if this episode meant something to you, share it with one person. That's how this work spreads. That's how we start filling in the cracks. Until next time, keep finding the gold.